Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Everybody, welcome to episode 18 of Everything Teams Phone Live. We're coming at you from sunny Sammamish, Washington today. Yep, it's just a rock throw away from Redmond headquarters. And if you don't know what headquarters we're talking about, you will soon. All right, you couldn't tell by the t-shirts and the logos that are floating around everyone. You'll know what we're talking about. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm Rick with G12 Communications. I've got a co-host right over there. His name, he could go ahead.
I think my name's Brandon the last time I checked. And on my screen, you're pointing the wrong direction.
Oh,
I think we're on different layouts. Good afternoon.
Our trusty CTO, there he is, Brandon Bradley. Brandon, where are you coming at us from today?
I am in spotty 5G country up on the Snake River between Washington and Idaho.
There you go, spotty Wi-Fi country. I haven't even heard of that one. That's well, that's interesting. All right, and everybody, drum roll here. We've got a special guest today. We've got a gentleman from Microsoft joining us, Jason. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks, folks. Yeah, no, pleased to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
There you go.
Yeah.
This is probably the most exciting show we've had. Like, seriously, this is going to be the most exciting show we've had. And we talk teams every single week, but we really haven't driven into, hey, this system versus that system, or if you have something like this, you may want to consider that. We really haven't done that sort of a show just yet. And you've got a special sort of unique background in that you come from a competitor, or you've got a significant amount of experience at, managing a Cisco platform. Is that right? Yet you're here all decked in blue.
Isn't that fun? And you can see some of the vestiges, if I point over the correct shoulder here, from that previous phase or era of my career. Quite a significant thing. To your point, spent a lot of time building, designing and building, and then also running Cisco infrastructure. So yeah, interesting to make the switch.
Yeah, and I'm Jason.
That's awesome.
Just for entertainment purposes, Jason, I see, you pointed out the Cisco library over your shoulder. I probably have that identical one, but I'm curious what those books are, like which ones they are. Are they the CCIE, CCNA, CCNP? Just curious. I'm, one geek to another.
Yeah, so I have, without looking at the exact books and pointing out each one of them, I know I have CCNA routing and switching. That was my first Cisco certification. I should also have Cisco CCNA voice, and then I might have the CCNP collab series. That was my last cert. I'd have to go look at them. Some of them are also pretty outdated at this point, sadly.
Yeah, for sure. No, I bring it up just because obviously our topic today is, how we transition from maybe a Cisco to Microsoft Teams phone, and just the idea that you're coming from. Am I back?
Yeah, I mean, I have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I should say this is going to be an interesting show between Garcia's internet bouncing and my 5G connection maybe bouncing. So we're just going to have to kind of ad hoc it. But yeah, anyway, I was saying, like, your Cisco experience, as we talk about, how we migrate from that to Microsoft Teams. I think it's important for our audience to know that, we're not just socializing, right? You have real world experience on both sides of the fence, whether, in your Cisco days or now today in your Microsoft Teams phone days. So
yeah, and fair is fair. So I do have to admit that my depth is much greater in the Cisco space, right? So if you're coming from Cisco, I can feel both your pain and your triumph of having designed and built and run that infrastructure, and then diving into the Microsoft side. I haven't implemented it nearly so much as I did the Cisco stuff, but enough to know what you're going to care about, what you're going to be thinking about as you consider, or even just learn more about Teams Phone as a voice platform.
Yeah, I think as we get into the show, from my perspective, I think the things I'm going to want to hone in on as we have conversation is, because we talk to clients all day long about, this idea where, it's, you're coming from a legacy 10-digit and extension based world to an identity based world. And there's this fine line of, well, Cisco did it this way, so I need Teams to do it this way. And it's going to be really fun to get into that part of the conversation as we move along.
There's so much of that. It's just such a different ideology. The way that the voice system itself is trying to route calls fundamentally at the end of the day. And you nailed the point. Everything was a dial string. SIP URIs were sort of an also ran. And I mean, there's so much variety and configuration and the design that a particular customer was going for. So, I walked into, I probably saw about 10 different Cisco environments that I worked in extensively, right, in my career. And they were all so different, right? The design approach was different. The dial plan and the dialing schemes they supported were so different. There's so many different ways to do it. And so much of the work was figuring out what the best practices were, going through all these different migrations and learning so that you could provide an optimized configuration for your user base. And on the team side, so much of that's kind of done for you a little bit. And we'll certainly talk about that in greater detail. But yeah, so different, the ideology.
Yeah. So Garcia, I see you put up a little presentation, so we can, if we want to touch on.
I just threw a little bit about Jason out there just to kind of, identify what we're talking about here, because I do want to show how deep his Cisco background goes, because we often, just like you said, we talk to customers all day and customers go, it's not a Cisco. It's not a Cisco. It's not a Cisco. Right. And certainly I can understand from a flexibility perspective, that there's things you can do in the Cisco space. But what we have Jason here to talk about is what are the differences between Cisco and Teams, and maybe not which one's better, or maybe we do ask that question, which one's better, but ultimately, what can someone expect when they're thinking about migrating from a Cisco platform? Because I'll tell you, the larger organizations that we run into that have a legacy Cisco platform in place, very to let it go, very reluctant organizations to go, obviously they're trying to eke out any value they can out of existing hardware spend, sometimes in the millions of dollars worth of hardware that they've got deployed. So understand from that perspective, right? However, from a pure utilization, functionality, ease of management perspective, what seems right? And should they be looking at Microsoft Teams, or should they just stay Cisco forever, right? So those are some things that are interesting to me, because we're obviously Microsoft Teams fans. We see Microsoft Teams deployed in many of our customers. We work the deployments, and we see the business continuity, and we see the business process improvement that organizations go through. So we see that productivity value, and so we're at as loud as we can, we're shouting from the treetops, no, you've got to be in Microsoft Teams. Like literally, we've got to be in Microsoft Teams. You should, as an organization. And so getting his perspective on this Cisco stuff is going to be fantastic. I'm super excited about it all.
Well, and the truth there, Rick,
well, should we dive in a little bit? Should we get, yeah.
No, sorry, just real briefly. I wanted to echo your point, because a lot of those customers exhibiting that reluctance, they are in Teams to some degree. Maybe they have chat turned off or something, right? They're trying to block various functions of it. I don't know. You see that quite a bit. But for the most part, if a customer has Microsoft Online Services, they have E3, let's say, right? They have Cisco for their telephony system, but they're still using Teams. Their collaboration's actually, in a lot of cases, happening in Teams, at least to some degree. And I know you guys have spoken quite a bit about sort of, I think Brandon had a specific term for it, going from window to window. I episode 17, he mentioned it again, and I just forgot it.
Swivel chair is my buzzword. Yeah, exactly.
So they already have that. And so we then have to slice up, what does the user experience look like? And then, we have to make sure we cover off on what the engineers care about. We have to talk about what the accountants care about. And then again, something you mentioned in the last episode is you've got these resources that come from the telecommunications side of life, and then you have these IT resources. And sometimes they cross over, sometimes they don't. You don't know really how that political landscape may look for that particular customer. And so we have to put our brain in a number of different chairs. We have to put on all these different hats when we're having these conversations.
Okay, let's start with, let's start at the engineering level, okay? Because I feel like I understand the CIO perspective, and the CIO and CFO guys are typically in sync, okay? And from a leadership perspective, the CIO is going, hey, I think Teams is where we need to go. It streamlines our organization. Maybe it's going to cost us less. Maybe it's not going to cost us less, but it's simple. Let's do this. Let's flatten out the organization from a communications perspective. So I feel like CFOs and CIOs are aligned in that they want Teams. They want Microsoft Teams. I feel like I've got this level of leadership in that director level who's grown up from network engineer to, maybe they're the telecom engineer, and they've come up in the organization. They've built a small team or a large team around them on the ability to manage what that person knew before, right? They've grown up in the Cisco space, and heavy technical, right? I can go build a dial translation. I can prepend calls. I can with specific numbers. I can do all sorts of cool stuff. And now I feel like you're taking that away from me at Microsoft, in Microsoft Teams phone. So let's start at that level. Jason, what do you see, buddy?
Yeah, it's hard for those folks, and I'm speaking from direct experience here, not to feel as though something's being taken away. That stack of books up here represents a lot of time and effort, and others on this podcast watching as well could speak to that and echo that. Yeah, it took a ton of effort to get the expertise needed to run those systems, to design and build them, to answer all the business demands that you tend to satisfy with an enterprise voice system. And so there's some sunk cost in there. There's some, I don't want to see my skills value erode. I put a lot of work into this, right? I built this Cisco environment, and I've got it maybe in a sort of a steady state where I'm just sort of taking care of it. And any pivot to a new system is going to represent so much effort, and I'm going to be reinventing what I've essentially already built. And the most enjoyable part of these conversations that I have, and I spend quite a bit of my time as a technology specialist talking with customers coming from Cisco. It's a statistically significant proportion of my customer base. To your point, right? A lot of these enterprise customers, larger corporate commercial customers are. And as we forge ahead in these conversations about Teams Phone and what it can do, you're checking all these boxes on functionality, right? Yeah, it has call parking. That's a random example, right? But you're checking these boxes, and the point that the Cisco engineers like to hear more than anything else is you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not going to duplicate all the effort that you put into your Cisco platform. A lot of this stuff is already built. You start talking about things like mobile and remote access, B2B calling, voicemail. Voicemail living in Exchange. In the Cisco world, that isn't remotely the case. And it goes back somewhat to the identity scheme that's implied by the Cisco voice environment. You have to synchronize your identities across and then stack stuff on top of them once you've synced them into the Cisco landscape. Voicemail lives in Exchange. It's already there. If you have any calling capabilities in Teams whatsoever, odds are you have voicemail sitting there in Exchange ready to go. That was something that we had to synchronize identities into, bolt numbers onto them to really establish a voicemail box. And when you tell them, you don't have to do that. It's already there. They're like, oh, okay, well, what about all these complicated, mobile and remote access? I want to enable access on my user base, smartphones and tablets and that sort of thing. How much effort is involved there? And you say, it's already there. The Teams app, we're on all these different platforms. If you can sign into the Teams app, you'll have your telephony identity as well. It comes with you wherever you go. The wheels really start to turn more. So initially it's all about how much work am I going to have to do? And then the wheels start to turn more toward, oh, wow, look how much better my quality of life could be. All this stuff is already there out of the box. That's what I'm seeing with my customers.
Yeah,
Let me ask this. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the other thing that intrigues me, and Jason, maybe you can answer this, and you kind of already did, but I assume you run into also the engineers that, they're type A, maybe they go, yeah, but I like having full visibility. I like having full control. I don't like the idea of Microsoft, because now I can't see, I can't control that back end. It's not my SBC. What do you say to that? Because I know
Oh
there's people
man.
listening that, from an engineering perspective, I was there once. I like control. Garcia would laugh at me and say he still likes control.
Yeah. Well, and it's a valid point. That's one of those things we normally have to take the house down to the studs a little bit and talk about, hey, what is a unified communications as a service solution? What does that really look like? I think in Cisco's recent past, what we saw as they provided more and more solutions that look kind of like UCaaS, and I'm talking about 5 or 6 years ago, right? A lot of that stuff is really just call manager in the cloud. You get your own instance of call manager. It's hosted somewhere else, but it's still just sort of call manager. You still have to build all of it. You have to manage it all essentially no differently than you did on-prem. They do have a UCaaS product now. And so when you start to take it down to this level of, hey, how does a UC system where you're hosting it on-prem, you have immediate access between all of your subscriber nodes, and you have your SDL links that have close network proximity to one another, versus sort of a UCaaS globally available solution where all of the survivability, all of the synchronization of your config exists in the cloud and is managed on a global scale. You have to really express things in an apples to apples manner and compare not call manager on-prem to Teams Phone, but Cisco's UCaaS solution hosted in the cloud to Teams Phone. And that comes with a lot of the same UCaaS realities, which is, for one, they have to protect the real-time services that make the bones of what you're trying to provide to your customer base. Calls have to flow. We all know that. Calls must flow. And so those are protected above all else. Your configuration changes, you know how it works. They get batched. They run on a rotational basis within the cloud services. And that's a reality with any UCaaS solution. So you have to surrender some of that control no matter what. Cisco's going to push you to their cloud. You're going to get sort of pushed to UCaaS no matter which vendor you choose to go with at the end of the day. And so I've found it productive to take those conversations back to, what's the strategy here? Where are you going? Are you going to keep hosting your own stuff on-prem, or are you going to the cloud like sort of everybody else is? I'm not going to say that you need to just trust us, but that is part of the UCaaS paradigm. There is a level of trust that you're conveying, that you're going to have in your provider to run a service properly. And I have a lot of customers who are holdouts. I say a lot. I have some certainly who are holdouts that say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to stay on-prem. We want our control. And it's placing a bet that you know how to run a data center better than Microsoft. I just don't find it a safe bet. And I think normally through the course of these conversations, we get to a point where we all sort of agree on that point.
Yeah. And I guess for me, the example that I try to think about is if you go back many years and you think about the VMware and the onset of virtualization and kind of the idea of the shift of physical to virtual, and even that discussion back in the day and even today, where you talk to these engineers about the benefits of virtualizing, even if you control it, about, hey, that nerve-wracking 3 a.m. upgrade that you're trying to do on bare bones versus virtualized, where you can just revert a snapshot if it goes sideways. It's just that next, for me, that conversation is we're moving into that next evolution where those nerve-wracking hour days are over, because you've shifted that responsibility off, and now you've freed your plate to polish your resume experience however you want, and it opens the door for so much variety. Whether you want to go, as a technical person, you want to start diving into the integration capabilities with Microsoft, around AI or business analytics, or whatever the case may be. And I think for me, it's the conversation with the technical guys is, where do you want to go, and what do you want to learn that you can't do today because you're so buried in day-to-day management?
Oh my gosh, you mentioned service reliability and 3 a.m. upgrades, and I essentially had war flashbacks, PTSD.
Yep.
installing SUs in the Cisco world. I had one time where I installed an SU and I rebooted. Everything came up fine. During the course of the reboot for that SU, it essentially bungled the bootloader. And so next time I rebooted that server, it couldn't find its bootloader, and it had no idea how to boot. And I had to rebuild my publisher at 3 a.m. So
Yep.
in the Cisco world, running your own service gives you so much control, but at a pretty steep cost. You have to make sure you're being real careful when you read the release notes and the, go look for bugs and things like that, because that was just, I got bit by a bug that I just hadn't read the right community forums article or whatever, right, where people were discussing it. And so, yeah, we've had a lot of, I don't want to say tumult, but just in my career, I had a lot of mixed experiences going from bare metal servers to UCS to third-party performance-based. It's been a lot. And so with that loss of control that you lament as an engineer, you're also getting somebody else to do your patching for you, essentially, right? It comes with genuine benefits, and we don't want to let those get lost in translation, certainly.
Right. Exactly.
So going back to the people for just a second, going back to the engineering guys that are and gals that are working in not in the data center, but are working on Cisco today. And you've built a background in telecom, right? You've got tons and tons of experience now at this point in telecom. And you're making the calls flow, right? That's the new T-shirt. Calls must flow. I'm loving that as a T-shirt. Next time I'm totally getting that made. So you've got this experience here. That experience seems transferable into the Microsoft Teams space. But then, like Brandon was talking about from a resume builder perspective, and I don't even think people need to worry about resume stuff, but I'm just talking about the opportunity to learn now what other benefits you can create using real-time communications with Microsoft tools. So I mean, I think if I think about technology, I think about technology is used to help a business accomplish something. Okay. That's ultimately what technology is, right? It's to help a business accomplish something better, faster, more efficiently, whatever it is. Right. So that's the ultimate goal in technology. If the technology piece is not doing something for you that's along the, that's supporting the business, then it's not doing its job. Right. That's I look at it when it's not doing its job there. So ultimately, if the skills are transferable, and you talked about, this portion of the job, the 3 a.m. stuff, the managing, bare metal, whatever it is, if that's all gone now, doesn't it give you the opportunity then to create kind of a not collaboration experience, but it does give you an opportunity to create a more efficient sort of experience for your internal organization, and therefore contributing significantly more in from the perspective than just managing some stuff that the technology is supposed to do. If technology is already doing this for you, Microsoft is doing the data center management for you, as an example, right? There's a lot that can be done. I think from a business perspective, your value seems to me like your value skyrockets now because you're doing more than what you were originally doing.
For sure. And Cisco was never for the faint of heart. A Cisco engineer had to be a network engineer. You had to understand LAN and WAN and QoS and all these different concepts. You had to be a systems engineer. You had to understand virtualization. I mean, we talk about all these different technologies. It really spanned the entire realm of technology. And so a lot of these Cisco engineers that think I don't want to cheapen my skills, erode the value of my skills that I've worked so hard to build, you just build more, honestly. Like you've already demonstrated that you understand all of these different forms of technology. Now we're going to the cloud. Do you want to branch out into Azure, BI? There's all these things. Power Automate is, in my opinion, maybe the most underrated Microsoft technology today. And every time I show it to somebody who is either a Cisco engineer or just somebody who really has some good chops, they're like, oh, I could do so many things with this. There's genuine excitement. And so that's really my thought when I get somebody who seems maybe a little cagey. And again, I that's where I came from. I've been in that chair feeling that way. What more could you do with your day if you could take some of these basic solution availability, survivability things off your plate because Microsoft can do it in the cloud really well. What could you do? How could you use your time? Where could you drive deeper value? Where could you maybe devote some of your energy to dealing with business demands and make the business work better? You know, a technologist that can demonstrate the ability to run and design and build these solutions, the impact is, I mean, it's there. Go get it. You know, go show how you can deliver that impact. There's so many other ways to do it, and you can just sort of branch out and get those hooks into other areas.
All right, brass tacks, Jason. Here we go. All right, this is a brass tacks question. Are there things now? Let's take from the management of the system, the infrastructure. Here we go. Are there things that you run into on a day-to-day basis that, you know, teams or not teams that Cisco does that maybe Teams doesn't do? Because we're going to get into, well, we can talk about the things that Teams does that Cisco does do all day because it's significant. But what are some things that you've run into that maybe, you know, people are still holding on to Cisco because they go, well, Teams doesn't do something like this. What have you seen in that, you know, from that perspective?
I'm going to work backwards on this one. This may not be the right approach for a podcast. I think we're supposed to be storytellers, and you want to sort of bury the lead a little bit, maybe. I don't know. At the end of the day, the truth is nothing. I've yet to run into any sort of use case, and I'm going to speak specifically to use case because mechanisms, at the end of the day, the mechanism is there to serve a use case. And so, no, I can't assign a single identity more than one line appearance. You can't have more than one phone number on a single identity, but it doesn't matter. The things that you would do with multiple line appearances on a single device or a single whatever in the Cisco world, you can still do all those things in Teams. Things like call delegation, right? That's our answer. These identity-based mechanisms are our answer. So the first sort of part A answer to this question is, I really haven't found anything that we can't do. Again, you can simplify the architecture so much. There's no cross-cluster extension mobility stuff. There's no expressway stuff. Like, there's so many pieces that represented so much complexity in Cisco that we just sort of obfuscated into the service itself. Like, it's there, it works. You don't have to do anything with it. The big one that I always have to point out to folks is fax. And Microsoft's position on fax is very clear. We don't think we have anything to contribute to fax. We don't really want to have much to do with fax, but the value of bringing fax into a Teams Phone solution, an enterprise voice solution like Teams Phone, there's really not a lot of value in it. You know, a lot of customers have already gone to fax by email or whatever the generic version of that solution is called. I always call it eFax, but I realize that's sort of the Kleenex effect.
Yeah.
You know, that's already had its day.
That's the J2 Global version of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's really the one where I'm like, hey, it doesn't do fax. Right. You know, there are answers. We have answers. You guys have answers for fax, but yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to basically the new quote then for me is going to be, you know, nothing. I like, and people will have to ask me Teams, and I'll maybe a Teams and a Cisco logo and nothing. It's why is it nothing? Well, there's nothing that Cisco does that Teams can't. I love it. I mean, obviously it's, you know, it does things differently, but man, that's a great answer though, because, you know, we sit here and again, we tell everyone Teams Phone. And we look at it again. I'm a business guy, so I'm not a technologist, you know, Brandon's our technologist, but I look at it and go, you can accomplish so much more from a business perspective and from efficiencies and productivity and all sorts of, I mean, Power Automate and Power Automate within Power BI and what's the other one that I'm
virtual agents
and Azure Communication Services. Oh man, I get so excited about all that stuff because now we're talking about you know, and again for the guys that manage a Cisco here, here's what we're talking about, right? This is the real sort of stuff right here. You know, we do dial tone, and I call my, you know, I'm a dial tone kind of guy. I have grown up in that space for 25 years. Okay. But when you get to take a dial tone person who's done, okay, all this stuff, you know, in the dial tone space, and now you get to put me into a a creative business, accomplishment. I can go accomplish something in from a business perspective, right? Whether it's whether it's a customer journey I can take part in now, or it's business process automation I can take part in now. Man, that gets exciting, because now you get to really see not just what real-time communications does, but what does real-time communications do as it relates directly to a customer, as it relates directly to, instead of I'm just, I'm making a phone work. Now I'm actively taking part in my business, right? Whatever that business may be, right? And so that's exciting. The things that you can create in ACS and Power Automate, right? Display, great stats, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I spend a pretty significant amount of time talking about Graph API and how layering solutions on over the top of Teams through the Graph API. It's, again, how do you want to spend your time? You can simplify it. You can simplify your architecture and spend a lot less time making basic stuff work, and then get a lot of that control that you're looking for in the first place. We have a lot of contact center solutions nowadays that are hooking into Teams Phone through Graph API, and they're just manipulating calls that are sitting in Teams Phone. Why run them out of Teams Phone into somebody else's cloud to treat them and manipulate them, and then have to run them back into the Teams Phone? I mean, there's a better way. That's really the theme, I think.
Yeah.
And no disrespect to anybody who has run Cisco infrastructures. Again, I've been there. But to your point, the world becomes your oyster coming out the other side in a Teams Phone atmosphere or environment, where all these other pieces of the ecosystem come into play. Power, you just mentioned it. Power's crazy. And you start to realize that all these different parts of the ecosystem are fair game. You can use them. You can do things with them. A Cisco engineer, I've never met one that doesn't love that reality. It's powerful.
Yeah. What are some things that a Cisco? Go ahead, Brandon. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'll say one thing that this. I'm not meaning this to be disparaging to certain big name companies out there, but we've all heard the term programmatic voice, and that's always kind of been this, like, what I'll call your SaaS or your PaaS or your UCaaS, whatever you want to call it. It's always been kind of a buzzword out there for the last, I'll call it 7, 8, 9 years. And while there's definitely benefits to those offerings, I would say what I'm seeing evolve in the Microsoft ecosystem, in that landscape, that is probably the truest definition of programmatic voice, as an example, just because of the sheer flexibility and dynamic capabilities of those APIs.
Yeah. And that's the reality of the ecosystem. If you're living your entire life in the Microsoft Online world, but you have this one detail, phone calls, that live outside of it, once you bring that detail in and you hook it into the rest of your collaboration and communications tool sets with all those other features of the world in which you live every day, get rid of that swivel chair action. I mean, it tells itself. The story really does tell itself, and it lends itself to so many possibilities immediately when you think about it like that.
And I think you struck on a very, very good point here just a little bit ago that I think our listeners need to hear is it's not about sending the call somewhere else, where traditionally in the sense you would send the call off in that programmatic sense. Now it's that call staying pinned between caller, Microsoft phone system, and you're just using logic on top of that to influence what that phone call needs to do and how it needs to behave. And that's huge. I mean, to me, you're solving a problem that most of those 800-pound gorillas never solved.
Oh, for sure. Oh, no question. Absolutely. And I can't say it better than that either. I have nothing to add. That is the fact of the matter to me.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if I'm an organization, Jason, looking to move to Teams from Cisco, what are the 3 biggest tips you could provide?
Okay, I have to narrow it down to 3.
You don't have to. Let's. You've got a list of 10. Let's go. What are some big tips that you can provide? This is it's something that the listeners need to hear, right? This is, if you've got, we've got organizations right now thinking, do I go from Cisco to Teams? Should I really? And the answer is a resounding yes. But what are some things they need to look out for while they're doing that?
Sorry, the first one is licensing. I coming from Cisco licensing, I didn't think it could be any more complicated, but it can. And there, I don't want to rehash the entire history by any means, but recent history with Cisco licensing has been tumultuous, to say the least. Going from perpetual licensing to flex licensing to there's just been the way the licensing has been managed on a server local in your infrastructure to sort of cloud-based smart licensing. It's been nutty over there. And then generations of different types of licenses, user-based licenses, device-based licenses. It's crazy. Microsoft has its own crazy set of licenses. So get really familiar with M365 maps, first of all, is my first tip, because you have to be able to make that change in your head. The solution, Microsoft has provided a solution design that's really similar. It's kind of conventional, right? You have Teams Phone Standard, and that is your phone system license. And you sort of get your phone system functionality with that, call parking and all these things you expect. I mentioned call parking earlier. And then we separated the PSTN connectivity out because you need options. To your point, a lot of these enterprises are coming in with their own PSTN connectivity. They already have highly negotiated contracts with maybe some 800-pound gorillas in that space, right? I don't know. We got to give people flexibility, and so we separated that out. The licensing, it's so important to understand it, right? So get ahead of it. That's my first tip. You'll understand the solution design because it pretty much runs the way it has the last 20 years. So licensing is the first thing. Identity is the second thing. If you've been in the Cisco space and you've been essentially ignoring identity because that's always been the Microsoft guys, right? That's over there. We don't care. We just go to them, and when we want to do single sign-on or anything like that, we'll have to work with them. And no, everything here is already native identity. We have the identity already for the vast majority of customers, and so our solution is trying to build on that. It is trying to leverage identity at the end of the day before anything else. So as you think about putting in a dial plan, understanding that the solution is always trying to translate a dial string back to an identity, that's really important. Cisco's really, and I don't want to try to speak to the current UCaaS offering from Cisco because I can't really do that quite so well. But historically in Cisco, everything was a dial string. It was all about the dial string. If that happened to be associated with an identity at the end of the day, like, okay, fine, cool, whatever. But it's the basis for everything over here. And there's good reason for that. One of the best surprises coming to Teams was audio quality. Teams calls are just so much better than G711 or G729 or even really G722 calls that I'd experienced in the Cisco world. And so there's pretty, it's robust. The things that we do with the Teams ecosystem, the features we bolt onto calls, and of course, calls, meetings, who cares, right? In our world, they're not so different. So thinking about your dial plan and your user experience in terms of Teams, in terms of identity, rather than dial string, that's a big shift. And I made that point number 2 here, but probably should have been point number 1, if I'm honest. Point number 3 is don't look a gift horse in the mouth, right? If we're going to take away the tedium and the minutia of running a solution, and we're going to essentially do that for you, take that as a, and you put it really well. What are you going to do with your time, right? You have a quality of life enhancement. Now you can figure out other ways you can drive value. Take that as a positive, right? And then sort of a part B to that third point here is ask questions, talk to people like me and people like you, and further up as well. I have a 3-stack video layout over here on my end. So sorry if the viewers don't have that, but ask questions. Nobody knows everything. Something I always like to say is every person I meet knows stuff I don't know. I take that as a challenge. I want to learn all that stuff, and so that's been the other part of what's so surprising coming to Microsoft. Everybody shares knowledge so freely in a way that I don't feel like the culture around Cisco Voice, it didn't feel that way. It was a commodity. Knowledge, expertise was a commodity. And it was this sort of zero-sum feel to it. In the Microsoft Voice world, you talk to all these really well-known figures. You gentlemen, Tom from Tom Talks, right? Spoken with him a little bit, and everybody's just so open and welcoming and freely gives information. So ask questions. Just ask tons of questions. Everything you want to know.
I'm going to second that.
Yeah.
And, I'm just going to second that real quick because we're a year into Teams Phone at G12 Communications, and earlier this year we started our blog and our podcast earlier this year, and we've been doing Teams Phone for this year, whether it's direct routing and then Operator Connect and things like that. But I can tell you that the industry, the community in Microsoft or around the Microsoft Voice and UC is just phenomenally open and so giving, and so the sharing environment and the genuine and authentic people that you meet in this space. It is heartwarming. I can't, it's crazy. It's just I've met so many amazing people in this space. And it's unlike any other sort of tech group that I've been a part of, right? And so I certainly second that. If you asked anyone, for help or a discussion on this, and anyone is willing to contribute, so they're all willing to share information. So I definitely want to second that real quick.
Yeah, and I'm gonna throw some 2 cents in here, Jason. I actually want to touch on. I'm glad Rick you put the tips in there, because I'm going to touch on all 3 of them real quick, just to kind of socialize my 2 cents on this for whatever it's worth. On the licensing piece, I think you said it very well. My comment to that is, I think the one thing Microsoft, and I've said this on other podcasts before, I think the one thing Microsoft is doing that, there's probably exceptions to this, but they're leveling the playing field when it comes to licensing, right? It's Microsoft's allowing, Sally's salad shop down the street buying into Teams at the same price point as your 1,000, 2,000 user organization, right? There's not a lot of this, bickering on price, which we all know. If you've come from a Cisco background, Cisco loves to hand you the Lamborghini price tag, and then you've got to spend days and weeks trying to negotiate that pricing down. Again, I'm not disparaging Cisco. I'm just saying that's the experience, right?
It is. So it's the reality. I had one employer, just real briefly to sort of second this. One of the employers on my resume was getting something like 80% off Cisco licensing.
You're like, what?
I don't know why that. I mean, economies of scale, I guess, is a reality of life that you can't necessarily negate. But I thought that was crazy. At the end of the day, I had other employers on my resume who didn't get anywhere. I mean, not even really half that kind of discount. Why? I don't know.
Yep, I think it's enough said on that. Just that Microsoft is silently disrupting that model, I think, and I just don't think people recognize that, and so I'm just calling that out. So
I hadn't thought about that. That's a good call out.
Yeah, on the understand identity, I think that's really important. But I think what's also important for our viewers to understand is that at some point, depending on the size of your organization, identity is going to be a requirement no matter what. Whether you're taking your Cisco and you're bolting into that identity solution, or vice versa. What I love about Microsoft, and I've said this plenty of times over again, that it's just there with Microsoft. You don't have to go figure out which XML file goes where, and which how do I plug my SAML integration in, and how do I make this work, and how do I make sure compliance auditing and all the logs are going to where they need, and how do I know that if I revoke permissions here, it cascades to there. It's just there because, as you said earlier, it's just part of the 365 environment. So identity is established and it's natively present. It's a win-win from a security and compliance standpoint.
Well, it is,
And
and we haven't even really gotten into compliance yet. But sorry, every time you mention another mechanism challenge, you mentioned SAML, my brain immediately goes back to previous environments
Mhm.
where I had to stand up SSO with between Cisco and some other IDP, right? Yeah, the fact you don't have to do that here, we can't overstate the value of that. And then again, that's just the identity portion. That's just sort of getting the user signed in. Who is
Mhm.
this user? How do we associate things like phone numbers? That's all good and well. But after that, we bring in compliance tool sets, right? Through Microsoft Purview. And now we're going to be able to wrap in communication compliance, and we're going to be able to bring teams under the banner of data loss prevention and, you know, call recording and your other policies that sort of govern your experience in calls. Now that applies to PSTN calls as well. I mean, it's crazy how scalable the
Mhm.
solution is, even though it's so simple. You know, I know we bury some of the finer knobs into PowerShell. We don't necessarily present them in Teams Admin Center, but honestly, it's a good thing. You know, if you're not going to need them very often,
Yeah.
why would we consume space in the GUI? And that is, I wanted to say this at some point. And again, to your point, Brandon, I don't want to disparage any other vendors. I don't, but it's just a different world. I show my customers Teams Admin Center and I say, look, everything's spelled out for you. There's no partition and calling search space and all these different words. You sort of need to go get a dictionary to figure out what they mean and what are you
Mhm.
supposed to do with them? I don't understand this. We spell out what all the configuration in Teams Admin Center does. We give you even suggestions in some cases as to what you might want to do with
Mhm.
that parameter, that configuration. That's so different. It's the same type of conversation that we had around the culture and the community of Teams Voice. The same thing is true of, seemingly anyway, of the people who built the interface that you use day to day as an engineer. They're not trying to make your life harder. They're really trying to make it easier, and I think they've done a really good job. I think I should make sure I'm giving credit where it's due there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then last point, your item number 3, my 2 cents on that is, you're absolutely right. And at the end of the day, I think telephony at the bare bones is it's kind of like routing and switching, right? It's become the foundation. It's kind of, it is what it is. And now it's about, telling a story. And I think if we can get, especially the engineers and the really technical people, if we can get them to look at it as, okay, I got the foundation. Now how can I build my story? How can I build that structure around it? And I'll give you one example. We're working with a client today that, or I say today, we're currently working with a client that called us up and said, hey, we know you're our phone service provider, but we would love it if you could help us understand the new Microsoft Premium licensing and how we can leverage that against not just voice, but in general. And that right there is the example of, you said, hey, don't be afraid to ask questions. There's real world example of someone asking questions. And now it's goes back to what I'm saying about, we have to be able to tell a story
Yeah.
and do it in a way that it just makes sense, it clicks, it resonates. And the better we do it, the better the customer experience is going to be, and the happier the user is going to be. I think the world is our oyster, as they say.
It is. Yeah. And you start to expand your perspective from how does this phone call work to how do calls work? What solutions and services and features can we wrap around them?
Yep,
Um,
exactly.
and I just think that has much grander implications for the user experience, to your point, than just that one type of call, that of course being PST and phone calls.
It allows us to take up that, take that actual consultant sort of role at that point, right? I mean, from our perspective, I mean, we're technologists, in under the hood, right? But you can understand if you're the consultant over here and you go, what is your business really doing? What are you really trying to accomplish? What can you do to, for this whole productivity, thing? What does a workflow look like for you, right? What are you trying to accomplish with that particular workflow? And it's peeling back, the business just a little bit to understand the objectives so that you can then tell that story and paint it in a beautiful color with a different tools that you have available to you that are above the data center space, right? So you're not messing with this stuff down here. You're actually creating that real business sort of productivity.
You touched on a really, really important point, I think, and it's something that I've had to do with customers. I really have to take the approach of what's the workflow look like? What are they doing at the end of the day? I think a lot of the time, we come from these different backgrounds. We think about these solutions in different terms and how should they work, right? Cisco, I mentioned, is very dial string centric. Teams is very identity centric. Throw all that away. What are the users doing? What does the workflow look like? I have to do this with customers all the time. Hey, let's get on a call with that user. If this department is saying that they're not able to, collaborate in a certain context the way they expect, OneDrive or SharePoint isn't working necessarily the way they expect. Let's see what they're doing. Let's take a look at it. The same is really true of telephony. It doesn't matter necessarily how you think the solution should work. What is the user doing? How does it impact the way they work day to day? And I think one of the greatest benefits of Teams Phone and the Microsoft Online services portfolio in general is that we can be more user centric. And at the end of the day, that's why we exist. The company is made of people. People need to be able to use the technology. Let's make sure they can do that. Really important point.
Yep. No, awesome. All right, that's great. Let's ask. I wish I had some. Let me ask the viewers here. If you've got any questions, you guys can pop them into the chat, because I'd love to see some real sort of world experience questions come up, or some real questions come up that maybe you have concerns about. If you're a Cisco organization looking to move to Microsoft Teams over the next 10 minutes, pop your questions in here, and we'll address them real time if we've got a moment there. So that being said, Jason, we've got 3 tips right there. Anything else that stands out that if you're a Cisco organization looking to or thinking about migrating to Microsoft Teams, what's some of the biggest benefits maybe that you have seen organizations experience? Then if let's just take the technical piece out of it, what benefits have you seen organizations experience in some of the deployments that you've done?
I could go down a list of the ones that I consistently see. Solution consolidation gives you a cost optimization. It gives you better user experience because you get rid of the swivel chair dynamic. There's all these things that we can talk about, but I think I want to maybe take it back into the technical realm for a second. There's just so many things you get rid of. Gosh, it's really hard to even, it's hard to even in some ways remember what life was like before going to this sort of newer way of doing it, this more optimized way of doing it. What was the question, Rick?
I've got one. I've got one that I can speak to maybe personally, and that's one of the best benefits that I think an organization is going to see is reduction in supporting disparate systems. I've been in organizations where like 10,000 plus like tens of thousands of employees in this organization, and every flavor under the sun for telephony and real-time collaboration around, could have been Slack, could have been Teams, could have been even Zoom chat, right? To go in and to truly unify your communication and bring it into the Teams ecosystem, you're going to reduce. It goes back to quality of life. You no longer are those support tickets, internal, external, whatever, trickling in. You completely streamline the whole experience to the point that what I found is it just kind of works.
You do, but I do have to make a point 4, I think. And it's going to be a little technical. It works, but I always have to make sure I cover this with my customers. Don't forget the network. I've had customers come to me and say, "Hey, we're POCing Teams Phone and we're having quality issues." And I'm always immediately like, "Okay, tell me more." Like I'm in. Tell me what you're seeing. I've had a lot of scenarios where customers didn't put in QoS for Teams. They had QoS for whatever solution they had previously or currently, I guess is the proper way to say that. But no QoS for Teams. I've had a lot of customers that had this remote work paradigm, in the pandemic, and then now people are coming back into the office and they're not understanding why Teams isn't working as well. They're having those call quality issues. And I'm saying, have you paid any attention at all to your WAN architecture? Are you still trying to backhaul all your traffic to a central location for an internet breakout that's sitting in a data center? We've got to make sure that we're thinking about how networks need to evolve for the UCaaS world. And that's,
and I think,
go ahead.
I think that opens up a question I want to ask you, because I think there's varying degrees of opinion. You know, you've got corporations for whatever reason that want to backhaul, but would you say largely that Microsoft Teams was designed as an internet first solution?
100%. And this is the biggest, this should be the way that we summarize what point 4 really is. In the Cisco world, your WAN was everything. Your enterprise voice system depended on the WAN in a way that Teams just doesn't. Teams was built on the internet. It's not, I get this all the time too. Is Teams just Skype for Business packaged up in sort of a UCaaS multi-tenant type of environment? No, guys, it is not. Teams was built in the cloud ground up, and that changes everything, right? Get us to the internet as quickly as possible. Get your users' traffic to the internet as quickly as possible. And invariably, when I have customers coming to me saying, hey, we're having quality issues, we're having whatever type of experience issues in Teams, I ask them about the network. What does the architecture look like? And invariably, there's VPN. They're not split tunneling. There's backhaul over WAN back to a data center. I had a customer a few weeks ago as an example. I don't remember who it is, and of course I wouldn't say, but I have 400 of them. Hard to keep track of anyway. But they were backhauling traffic from California, the coast, right, LA, to like Chicago or something before it could hit an internet breakout. And then, oh, by the way, no QoS. That internet circuit was undersized because they hadn't really accounted for the things that have changed in the world. Mm-hmm. When everybody went home in March 2020, more and more companies have gone down the road with UCaaS solutions and as a service solutions, full stop. And so those WAN links have just diminished in importance, and the internet circuits have ramped way up in importance. I'm always telling customers, please deploy local breakouts. Yeah, I understand that's not what your architecture has looked like, but we've got to talk through what the traffic is going to try to do. To your point, Teams, it needs the internet. It's built in the internet.
Very good. I know we're coming up on the hour, Rick. So I think Jason and I might have to do like a tech talk we might need to like break out and do our own little tech talk.
Yeah, exactly. What's Jay Cohen's got something, Express Route as a solution.
Okay. I'm going to make an assumption real quick and say this individual is probably asking about Express Route for Microsoft 365, or I think we actually call it Office 365 in this context. Yes, I do get that question quite a bit. And unfortunately, it isn't really the answer. And I can go down the road and explain why that's the case, but in the amount of time I have, suffice it to say, our Express Route PG, or just internal teams that run that product, essentially, they will not approve Express Route for Office 365 alone unless you have a really weird use case. Like your ISP isn't routing to Microsoft Online the way that they really should be. Occasionally see that. Those kinds of circumstances can lend well to an Express Route as a solution to connectivity issues or quality issues. Generally, the answer is no, and we have to get into the nitty-gritty around the WAN architecture. It's almost always WAN architecture getting in the way, truly. So yes, feel free to ask your Azure folks about Express Route. It's really good when you want to run a solution hybrid. Maybe the database you want to keep on-prem or something, but you want to run a lot of the rest of it in Azure. That happens all the time. We see that, right? That can make sense. It can make sense if part of your solution is still on-prem. But for Office 365, it's just not. It won't actually generally fix the issue. So sorry if that's a little long-winded for the amount of value I drove with the answer to that question, but that's the reality.
No, that's awesome. Thank you very much. Brandon, I think you get the final question, Brandon. You get the last say in this one, because this is a tech talk more than anything. So why don't you fire any last minute things at Jason, and we'll wrap it up.
I got to be careful what I ask because we'll go down another rabbit hole. So I think what I'll leave it with is, this is really the idea was, hey, we're going from Cisco to Teams. Any parting final words to those hesitant Cisco guys that just go, yeah, but maybe they're not fully convinced.
Yes, I do have one actually. You mentioned hardware lifecycle earlier, and we do have answers to that. So whether you're talking about telepresence devices, you have some really expensive IX5000s you don't want to let go of. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up now.
Mhm.
Those were expensive though. We have the device trade-in program for Teams. Please, it's very easy to see what it would look like to trade in some of your legacy devices. Use it. We can provide a link maybe in the notes or something. It's so easy to just get a quote sent to your email for what that program would offer for your gear. And you'll find all your Cisco stuff in there. 8800 series phones. You probably won't find 7900 series phones in there, but anyway, you'll find a lot of good stuff in that program. So we have answers to the lifecycle struggles. Don't let that be a blocker. Come talk to us.
I love it. I love it. And I'm going to leave this with the Nike slogan there, right? I mean, I think you should just do it.
Yeah.
That's just because I watched Air this past weekend, right? So I watched Air this past weekend, so it's all fresh in my mind now. So just do it. All right, everyone. Well, listen, that's a wrap for episode 18 of Teams, Everything Teams Phone Live. I want to thank Jason with Microsoft for hanging out with us for the hour and walking our listeners through some of the cool stuff. Brandon, sign us off, buddy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. And it's a holiday weekend. I hope everyone has a safe, fun, and relaxing holiday.
There you go.
Thanks, guys.
See you, everyone.